نبدأ اليوم الجلسة الثالثة في اليوم الثاني لمنتدى العرب والصين. نناقش فيها العلاقات، أو نناقش فيها علاقة الصين والقوى الكبرى في المنطقة، العلاقات مع القوى الكبرى والإقليمية. في خلال هذه الجلسة يكون معنا الأستاذ والدكتور منوشهر دراج، وهو أستاذ الشؤون الدولية في جامعة تكساس كريستيان في مدينة فورت وورث ولاية تكساس. صدرت له العديد من الأعمال حول العلاقات بين الصين ودول الشرق الأوسط، وقدم الكثير من وجهات نظره في مؤتمرات داخل الولايات المتحدة وخارجها، وأيضا حاصل على شهادة الدكتوراه من جامعة تكساس في مدينة أوستن. أيضا معنا السيد كشكن، وهو أستاذ مساعد في قسم العلوم السياسية والعلاقات الدولية في جامعة مالتيبي بتركيا، وهو يدرس مادة المجتمع الأفريقي والسياسة في جامعة إيزك، وكانت له العديد من الأبحاث والدراسات، وحصل على شهادة الدكتوراه في علم الاجتماع من جامعة فرجينيا للتكنولوجيا. أيضا معنا الدكتور جورج جياوزيو داون، وهو طالب دكتوراه في جامعة تسينغوا في الصين، وهو حاليا زميل زائر في كلية جون كينيدي في جامعة هارفارد، وسيصبح باحثا زائرا في كلية الشؤون الدولية والسياسات العامة في الجامعة الأمريكية في القاهرة. هو حاصل على شهادة الماجستير في الدراسات الشرق أوسطية من جامعة بكين. أيضا السيد سعيد شفقت، هو أستاذ ومدير مؤسس لمركز السياسات العامة في جامعة فورمان كريستيان في لاهور، وشغل منصب أستاذ متميز لكرسي القائد الأعظم محمد علي جناح. فإني نبدأ مع السيد منوشهر دراج في ورقته بخصوص علاقات الصين مع إيران والسعودية، محاولة إنشاء توازن دقيق. فليتفضل.
Let me begin by saying that it's a pleasure and honor to be here. I wondered about the Arab Center, and I learned recently it's a brand new institution. And let me also congratulate the organizers who have done a marvelous job of organizing a very fruitful forum, which has been a forum for rich exchange of ideas so far. And I hope that the dialogue that has started here continues in the future. I had organized a PowerPoint presentation that it is about 40 minutes. When I learned that I get 15 minutes to talk, I have abandoned the PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to talk about the politics of it. And I'm going to talk about one slide that I have there later, and the ramification of One Belt, One Road that we talked about a little bit in regard to Iran and Saudi Arabia. But let me also start by saying that you really cannot speak intelligently about the relation of China with Iran and Saudi Arabia without speaking of the United States, the big elephant in the room in that process. So I'm going to briefly also speak about the role that the United States plays in this relationship. And since we did spend a good amount of time yesterday to talk about historical ties that this region of the world has with China through the Silk Road and all of that, I'm not going to spend any time on that. In my paper I do, but here I'm going to forego that because of the limitations of time. Let me just say that the Iran-Persian Empire, more precisely, had also elaborate relation with ancient China, and there was a particular exchange between Tang Dynasty and Persian Empire at the time. That goes back to pre-Islamic period in Iran. It goes back to 6th century. And the three religions of ancient Persia, Nestorian Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Manikism, profoundly impacted development of Buddhism in China. And things like Persian food, Persian polo game, Persian music, Persian poetry found favor in China, and vice versa. There was a great deal of cultural exchange between the two empires of West Asia, which was Persian Empire, and East Asia at the time. So with that historical legacy, let me come back to the relationship between China and Islamic Republic, jumping the entire period of history. But let me say in parentheses that establishment of relationship after ascendance of communism in China happened in Iran in 1971 under the Shah. And we see that the establishment of relation with Saudi Arabia does not happen until 1990. Let me briefly say what are some of the similarities that Iran and Saudi Arabia have vis-a-vis what they offer to China. They're both energy giants. Saudi Arabia much stronger in that domain, $262 billion of reserves, billion barrels of reserve, versus Iran, 132 billion barrels of reserve. And as such, they have played a significant role to China's energy security, but also as powerful nations, they're also important trade partners for China. But when it comes to political issues and strategic issues, the differences emerge in regard to Iran and China. For Iran, for the Islamic Republic, because since its inception, since the hostage crisis of 1980, it has been under the US and European and its allies' sanctions. The choice of partners economically, politically, and militarily was fairly limited. For Saudi Arabia, as a close ally of the United States, on the other hand, choices were fairly available and multiple. So during the Iraq-Iran war, 1980-1988, China provided weapons to both sides, mostly through North Korea as a mediator, but provided weapons to both sides and tried to stay neutral in that process. And China played a significant role in development of Iranian nuclear program in earlier stages of its development, in particular, trained Iranian scientists, built the research reactor in Isfahan, and even provided some enriched uranium to Iranian government, and became its major supplier of arms until US pressure made it to hold back by 1997 or so, and then Russia emerged as the major supplier of armament, number one supplier of armament. Now China is number two. Therefore, Iran also emerged, emerged as number one trade partner for Iran by 2007. Number one importer of Chinese oil, exporter to Chinese energy market in the world. China, in other words, is number one importer of Iranian oil. Therefore, China plays a significant role as a trade partner, as an energy partner, but also as a security provider for Iran. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, is primarily for security and armament reliant on the United States. Just to give you a figure, in the last 7 years, Saudi Arabia has bought $95 billion worth of weaponry from the United States, and right now it's in number 3 category of expenditure on armament globally. After United States and Russia, Saudi Arabia is number 3. So when it comes to security matters and security issues, Iran is much more reliant on China and has a partnership with China that Saudi Arabia does not, although there have been some sale of missiles to Saudi Arabia, respectively, in 1998, in 2007, and some in 2014. But China also provided Iran with its missile system because Iran does not have much of an air force. Missile systems work as its strategic weapons with the reach of Mediterranean. And without Chinese technical assistance, this would not have happened. So for the two countries, China, while there's some similarities in terms of trade partner, energy partner, and sort of petrochemical partnership, joint venture and all that, China looms differently. For Iran, because there was a steady threat of regime change, a steady threat of possibility of US invasion, China was isolated in some ways internationally, China emerged as a riot raft or a rescue boat, if you will. For Saudi Arabia, now Saudi Arabia had several partners, Europeans, United States in particular, and China was another partner out there. Okay, Saudi Arabia did not suffer from isolation that Iran did. And the turning point comes with the change of fortunes politically in the region, which is not a result of doing of Saudi Arabia or Iran, but as a consequence of U.S. invasion of Iraq and U.S. wars with Iraq. Due to U.S. war with Iraq and overthrow of Saddam Hussein, and due to U.S. war against Taliban and overthrow of Taliban in Afghanistan, two major nemesis, enemies of Iran, Iranian government in the region, were overthrown. Therefore, the strategic balance of power were shifted. Not only Saddam was removed, a pro-Iranian Shiite government was empowered in Iraq, and Iran had very good relation with Hamid Karzai government, which replaced the Taliban government, and also was the largest donor among developing nations to reconstruction of Afghanistan after Taliban were overthrown. And of course, with the empowerment of Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran now has had a strategic depth in Mediterranean that it did not have before, and with empowerment of Bashar al-Assad, an attempt to overthrow Bashar al-Assad government, which has remained unsuccessful so far. It has also its alliance with Syria, which also gives it the depth in the Mediterranean that it did not have before. And so far as where Riyadh sits, the balance of power has shifted to its detriment. Okay? And this has been done not so much, as I said, for the most part, by what United States policy has resulted or has created. So now bring in United States and bring in China and bring in the whole nuclear issue. I want to talk about that a little bit and then talk and end with one belt, one road. The United States wanted the nuclear deal with Iran for its own reasons. Due to U.S. close alliance with Israel and especially Israeli preoccupation with possibility of Iran turning into a nuclear weapon state, United States, the two historically pillars of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East have been access to energy resources, and they have been security and safety of the state of Israel. So one of the major pillars of American policy was under question or imperiled. And U.S. wanted to make sure that given its experience with very unpopular Iraqi war and Obama's legacy that he wanted to bring the troops back home, he was not about to start another war with Iran over the nuclear issue. He wanted to resolve it peacefully if he could. And the fear in Riyadh was that if that was to happen, a rehabilitated Iran, there's a peaceful resolution of this conflict, not only means a loss for Saudi Arabia. Economically, Iranian oil is going to come to market. Iran is going to be empowered economically, and its influence is going to grow even further in the region. Was a red light. It was not a desirable outcome. For Tehran, on the other hand, that it was a desirable outcome, and China played a very proactive role, although low profile as always, but proactive role to ensure that this happened. So far as China was concerned, unimpeded by sanction and restrictions that sanctions would put on China's dealing with Iran, it could now even expand further its relation with Iran. And indeed, what we saw when Xi Jinping visited Tehran in January of 2016, the way that he described the bilateral relation was, I'm quoting him, "We are natural partners." And the two sides committed themselves to a 25-year strategic partnership and pledged to expand bilateral trade from currently $50 billion annually to $600 billion, I think it's too ambitious, if you ask me, to $600 billion by 2025. So, as what we have learned is that Iran, while it has met its side of the bargain in regard to nuclear deal and has exited almost 98% of its uranium enrichment capacity, has shifted it abroad, and Chinese are helping to turn the Iraq nuclear plant facilities, which had capacity to produce plutonium, which is necessary for weapon system, into a peaceful nuclear reactor that generates isotopes for medicine, electricity, etc. That has testified, and all the IAEA access that it has, unfettered and unlimited access to Iranian nuclear facility, that Iran has met its share of the bargain. However, indirectly, United States, because of the division between between Obama administration and the Congress, between Republicans and Democrats in the United States, there are those, it's very obvious that Trump has said, if I become the president, I'm going to scrap the entire nuclear deal. And it's also obvious that many Republicans in the Congress did not favor it. And the problem or the mistakes on both sides in regard to nuclear deal was that it became a deal between Obama administration and Rouhani administration rather than between the entirety of Iranian government, and Iranian hardliners were not on board on that, and US Republicans were not on board on that. So it's become a nuclear deal between Obama administration and Rouhani administration, and we don't know how long it's going to last if these two administrations are not going to be in power anymore. And as a result, we have seen many international banks, including European banks, which now see Iran does not have access to US banking system and the dollar system, are hesitant to do business with Iran. Mr. Kerry, who was speaking to J Street, which is a more liberal Jewish lobby in the United States, a few weeks ago, he raised his three fingers, meaning that all the hype that Iran is going to get $150 billion or $100 billion was just that.
1 minute.
So far, they have got $3 billion of their frozen assets accessible. Yeah. And so let me end it with this. I see One Belt, One Road as an expression of two phenomena. One, reaction of Chinese to the attempt of the United States to contain rise of China. How did it manifest itself? Bush and Obama both tried to court India, the largest power in Asia. They both visited India, brought Indian Prime Minister to Washington, expanded trade ties with India. And the perception was that India has the ability, population-based power, to check China's rise, and they have a history of conflict. And Obama administration held joint exercises with Australia, military exercises. I call both of these haphazard attempt at containment of rise of China. So I see One Belt, One Road in one sense a reaction to that, but in a more significant sense, we have been wrong in the past day talking about China as a rising power.
Thank you, Dr. Daraaj.
China, yeah, give me 1 minute, I'll end. China is not a rising power, it has risen. And is understanding of Chinese leaders that no longer the period of Deng Xiaoping, who said, keep a low profile, no longer that is upon China. China has risen and has to act accordingly. And this, if you pay attention for a moment to this map that depicts the new Silk Road and the new Maritime Road, it starts from eastern part of China, goes through western China, where most of the Muslims, about 30 million Muslims in China live, where there are pockets of poverty. The plan is to develop that areas, and then it goes to all the energy hubs through Central Asia, comes to Iran, through Turkey, goes to Europe and Russia, Northern Europe, and Maritime Silk Road, then brings it to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and we go back to India. And China has actually expanded this relation with India, and India is playing both sides. So if you envision this, Iran becomes...
Thank you, Dr. Daraaj.
Iran becomes a link.
Thank you,
link for expanding One Belt, One Road to Central Asia and Europe. Therefore, its strategic position vis-a-vis China has been elevated.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
يتحدث الآن السيد أو الدكتور طرغل كشكن عن العلاقات الصينية التركية والصعود القومي للإيغور.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Also, thank you very much for organizing this conference. It's great to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk about the Turkish-Chinese relation in the crucible of the modern Uyghur nationalism. I'm going to give the brief overview, actually. I'm not going to go into the detail. I have a 12,000 words paper. I'm not going to talk about this. But I am going to give short description of this complicated relationship between Turkey, China, and Uyghur nationalism. And plus, now third actor get involved in this relationship, basically the United States. But before this, let me show you this a little bit marketing maybe. China in the Middle East academic network that we have. We have a mailing list for this, and it has been active last 2 years basically, and we organize 2 conferences. One is in Beijing, the other one is in Qatar in March. And we just published a new issue of the Sociology of Islam, new special issue, China, Islam and Middle East basically. You can download from the Brill. Right here, this is the 10 articles here. This is the academic peer review journal. You can download, and this is also the website we organize this China in the Middle East academic network. This is for your information. And third annual conference, we already organized 2 annual conference, and the third annual conference will take place hopefully in Iran, Tehran, collaboration with the University of Tehran. Let me go to my presentation. Uyghur nationalism is, from my perspective, it's one of the most important aspects in the Turkish and Chinese relationship, basically. I'll give you the example why it's important. For example, name of the Eastern Turkestan was introduced by a Russian scholar in early 1800, formerly known as Tarımbasın, which means basically altı şehir. 6 cities. It's a very interesting. Turks migrated from the Urumqi, Kashgar, Turpan, those areas through the Iran basically, and converted to Islam. And one of the 3 important scholars basically on Turkish studies lived and died in Kashgar. Kashgarlı Mahmud, who wrote the Divan-ı Lügat-ı Türk, Yusuf Has Hacip, and Abdülkerim Saltuk Buğra'an, basically. These are very important, basically, thinkers in Turkish history, basically. Therefore, it's important ties. Turkey was formed out of the ashes of the Ottoman Empire as a nation whose foundations are built on the secularist and modernist tendencies, as was the common trend in the Middle East in the early 1920s. By comparison, China was established with a hybrid of socialism and nationalism, a combination which served as a reaction to and against the British and American imperialism. In addition to roots of the unification of China arose from in the Maoist revolution in 1949, and both countries tried to modernize their societies by using the state-centered economic system. However, this changed in the late 1970s, including the Turkey and China. And Turkey have since then both moved towards more neoliberal economic development policies by using the World Bank and IMF policies and practices in order to manage within the globalized era after 1980s. Turkey did not recognize the PRC in this context until 1971, similar to Israel basically in 1992, or some of the Arab countries. There were limited relations between 2 countries. Then from 1979 to 1982, as a result of the Cold War, Turkey became a member of the NATO in 1952 basically, and almost 30,000 US troops deployed in Turkey with 27 military bases between 1959 to 1972. Did not have any official policy toward China. However, in 1982, former military dictator Kenan Evren visited China and met with the Chinese officials and the military establishment. This was one of the first contact with the PRC. After the Evren's visits, helped by Chinese move towards the neoliberalism era in the global arena, relations between 2 countries transformed, driven by the ordinary business and economic cooperation. But relations between 2 countries seems to be based on the 2 important dimensions, trade primarily in the manufacturing sector and Turkey's NATO membership. However, many scholars forget to emphasize another important, perhaps the most important aspects in this complicated and multidimensional relationship, Uyghur nationalism, or what we call modern Uyghur nationalism. Neither China nor Turkey can avoid this issue in dealing with each other. As you can see in 1997, 2009, and 2015 incidents, basically, either in Turkey or in China or in Urumqi, other places. But trade relations, foreign affairs, cultural exchange, all of the aspects of the relationship between China and Turkey are impacted by the Uyghur nationalism. That, as you will see, the related dynamics of the pan-Turkism. In this presentation, our article argued that the Uyghur nationalism is, in fact, the most important factor in the political, cultural, and economic relationship between two nations. The relationship between China and Turkey is different from those discussed before in this conference, in that Turkey is no major supplier of the natural resources. It thus constates good case to investigate Chinese maneuvering in the region beyond oil. Prior to both nations' economic liberalization in the early 1980s, China and Turkey had not established a significant relationship. Sensitive issues such as the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, a Muslim minority, Turkey's NATO alliance, had held back development of their relationship. This changed with the political reapproachment between both countries in the 1990s, after Turkey settled the policy dilemma of the Uyghurs, basically. There are two noteworthy aspects to the Turkey-Sino relationship, which was upgraded to strategic partnership in 2010. Bilateral trade and political relations in terms of the economic, as Altay Atlı notes, Turkey has one of the most resilient economies in the region, but has so far been able to upgrade its exports to higher value goods. In addition, Turkey has had a significant overall trade deficit. This general observation translates the trade relation with China. In 2013, Turkey's total trade with China was 28.3 billion, of which only 3.6 billion was Turkey's export, with the remaining 24.7 billion corresponding to Turkey's imports from China. But this relationship is more than the economy. Turkey export to China consists of raw materials, chemicals, investment goods, plant, machinery, equipment that enable the productions, and intermediate producer. Good makes the majority of the Turkish imports from China, Republic of Turkey in 2013, according to officials. Other major areas of the investment and collaboration includes Chinese contribution to infrastructure projects in Turkey, including the building of the high-speed railway linking in Ankara to Istanbul. Leaders of the two countries have committed to increasing bilateral trade to 50 billion by 2015. This was, the case under the in 2012 meeting between Erdogan and Hu Jintao. In that time, these are the fastest growing economies, Turkey and China. The shortcomings of Turkey's economy, as presented above, a matter of the concern for Ankara. Goods from China are penetrating the Turkish market due to cheaper Chinese labor and production costs, arguably also due to similar production structures. Turkish traders have been complaining of the unjust, unequal competition due to quantity of the Chinese imports. According to Score, this Israeli scholar, each ship full of the Chinese product that docks at the Turkish ports is causing the closure of the Turkish factory. This was, some of the, negative aspect in this relationship in the context of the trade. Turkish government has been pushing forward with bilateral trade relation and strategic Sino-Turkish partnership. Even as certain interest groups pursue this as a threat to their economic well-being. The government has attempted to allay fears by proposing several approaches to remedy the threats and competition and maximize the opportunities of the Sino-Turkish economic relations. But first, Turkey's objective should be an increase in their total amount of trade. Second issue Turkey can address vis-a-vis its interest in China, its strategic investment in the tourist industry, so as to improve the balance of payments, attracting more Chinese visitors to Turkey could balance the relationship significantly. A third approaching is for Turkey to pursue cultural and educational opportunities that will enable to better understanding of China. Turkey's Ministry of the Education and Sports initiative to develop Turkish expertise in the Chinese language. Chinese is now offered in certain high schools, and in Turkey has partnered with the Chinese educational institutions in study abroad programs to China. Furthermore, Chinese have been allowed and encouraged to set up Confucius institutions within the Turkish educational institution. Almost 5 institutions were established since 2012 in Turkey. And military relationship also, partner with the PLA, People Liberation Army. I'm going to pass very quickly. But don't forget, Turkey is a NATO ally. This is one of the most negative aspects also between Turkey and Chinese relationship, basically. And go back to, the Uyghur nationalism. It's very interesting, the relationship between Turkey and China, or Uyghurs, basically. İsa Yusuf Aptekin is one of the most important guy in the Uyghur nationalism, who died in 1995. Migrated to, Turkey from the Xinjiang and Kashgar in 1949, after the China basically, captured the leadership of the Eastern Turkestan Republic in 1949, executed one of the leaders in 1951. Basically, they escaped from the Pakistan and they came to Turkey, and some of them went to Saudi Arabia, and some of the Eastern Turkestan movement basically went to Germany and Sweden and Australia and Japan. It's a very interesting, but this leader basically died in 1995. It was a very important leader. As you can see from the pictures, he met with every Turkish president and prime minister in Turkey. How this person is important, basically, you can see from the picture. And the first one is the Crimean leader from the Ukraine, Abdülcemil Kırımoğlu. The second one is Turgut Özal, who was the president and prime minister in Turkey after the Kenan Evren. And third one is the Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. This was the funeral in the İsa Yusuf Aptekin funeral ceremony. And the fourth one is the, Elchivey, basically, the former president of the Azerbaijan. At the dawn, you can see the, the former president of the Turkey, Süleyman Demirel, and prime minister, basically, who passed away, both of them opposition leader, as you can see from here. But Uyghur nationalism, between now radicalism and American softcore imperialism. This is one of the most important parts. Uyghur nationalism is now transforming. This is not the Uyghur nationalism under the İsa Yusuf Aptekin. After 1995, Uyghur nationalism has changed, transformed into the more modern human rights argument. This is very important. World Uyghur Congress was formed in April 2004 during the meeting in Munich, Germany. Uyghur Human Rights Project, Uyghur American Association, the World Uyghur Youth Congress, and formed this organization. This was the beginning stage that modern Uyghur nationalism was hijacked by the NED. I don't know how many people know the NED, NDI, IRI, National Endowment for Democracy, National Democratic Institute, International Republican Institute, and they have a negative policies on Latin America in the 1980s, as you can see from the readings maybe. But on the other hand, there is another form of Uyghur nationalism is emerging from this process. One part is the modern Uyghur nationalism hijacked by the United States, and the other part is radicalism. Salafi movement in the Uyghur nationalism, basically, especially Hizbul Islam el-Turkistani, or formerly known as the Doğu Turkistan Islami Hareketi Etim, and Eastern Turkestan Islamic movement has been active since 1997, actually. It's very interesting, and collaborated heavily with the Tahir Yoldashov and Islamic movement to Uzbekistan. Uyghurs and Uzbeks, they speak almost similar dialects of the 95% of similar. And collaborate through the radicalization. Yeah. Just a couple more minutes, if you can give me.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
Okay. Last year, Erdogan visited to China, 2012. And last year, 2012, he visited first, then 2015. This was the important visits, 2 of them. On July 28, more than 30 years later, Recep Tayyip Erdoğan is the first president who visited China with the 5 state ministers, businessmen, and more than 60 journalists. Visited Beijing, Shanghai, and Xinjiang. This was very interesting visit last year. As you can see in the 2012 visit, basically Erdogan and Davutoğlu, that you can see the basic ties between these Uyghurs and Turks and Turkey. And therefore, China is, sometimes, we have a very interesting relationship. But if you look at the Pew Research from 2008, I think, 2008, as you can see from here, Chinese favorability in Turkey
1 minute, please.
Is the lowest one in the world. Lowest one in the world, 27. As a result of this. But the last part, late May and early June 2015, a month before the Erdogan's visit to China, in the Turkish media, we start to see the news about banning fasting and Taraweeh prayers in Uyghur region, basically in Xinjiang, in Kashgar. For Uyghurs in China, this provocative news fueled the protests against China and Chinese in Turkey. This was very interesting. On July 6, Chinese Foreign Ministry issued a travel warning after Turkey protests targeting the Chinese restaurant, consulate, and individuals. In Istanbul, during this protest, Turkish-owned Chinese restaurant, Happy China, was vandalized. On July 1st, 2015, interestingly, the chef of the restaurant was Uyghur, who migrated to Turkey. Owner is Turkish. As you can see, these are some of the fabricated news, basically, portrayed and showed in the Turkish media before the Erdogan's visit. This was very interesting. Therefore, Erdogan, in a press meeting, said, what's happening in Turkey before my visit to China is quite interesting. Çin seyahatim öncesi yaşananlar manidar. And furthermore, he said, news which are circulated in the media, and large part of it is a lie or exploitation, and we do not approve these incidents. East Asian people who are visiting our country are friends. They are our guests, and we should not fall into the trap of the provocators, basically.
Thank you,
this
Dr.
was very
Kashkan.
interesting. But I'll take the questions, then I'll answer them basically during question and answer sessions.
Thank you very much. شكرا دكتور كشكن. تأثير صعود الصين في مثلث الخليج وإيران وباكستان، والدكتور سعيد شفقت. تفضل.
I'll try to be quick since I'm sitting very close to the chair. I don't want him to give me every 2-minute warning, so maybe I'll finish it in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to use one-liners for you, and it may not be a very coherent kind of a presentation that one would like to sort of make. Although I have a very long paper, whereby I'm focusing around 4 basic issues. One is what is the rise of China. It has risen. So how is it really being interpreted by others? So in that context, there are 6 kind of approaches that I identify. From the realist school, which is making a claim that we are in a situation where the rivalry competition between China and US can really lead to confrontation. And if one is following General Harris, the naval commander of US, the statements are coming to the effect that China is aggressive, expansionist. I'm paraphrasing him, and therefore, that kind of presentation is there. The other is, when you began to think in terms of neoliberal order, terrorism, and the multipolarity part. But the last part, which is the 6th sort of interpretation I looked in the rise of China, is basically the ideation, a very pragmatic ideation of Chinese scholarship in terms of harmonization, making a case of why harmony is needed in the world, global world order, with the assumption that there is chaos and disorder. Hence, they are sort of really pushing this. And it is in this context that I also see that US-China interests, particularly not only in the Middle East, but in general in the global world order, to make it as it is, they converge rather than diverge. So, this convergence is of immense significance, and it is of great importance. So you will see considerable degree of posturing between US and China on military and the kind of, allegations that they may make and use against each other. Nevertheless, deep down in the last 15 to 20 years, and particularly now, there is a greater understanding, consistent dialogue between the two, and hence one needs to recognize this as a fundamental change in the world order. And my own understanding and interpretation, and as I argue in the paper, is that when you look at this convergence business, what you really need to recognize is that the Americans are more than willing to make a case that as far as the developing world is concerned, we are interested in basically developing the institutional order. Democracy, human rights, and matters related to governance. These are the kind of concerns that we are interested in. Chinese, if you have money, you are interested in infrastructure projects, yeah, we have no problem, so kindly go ahead and do it. So that's the kind of thrust that one is really seeing when one makes a case of convergence of the two interests. So, they're able to sort of figure out how we may be able to think in terms of dealing with particularly Gulf, Middle East, and South Asia, but also in the larger global context. I also want to suggest to you, as I look at the rise of China, and I thought this quote by Pope Francis was really instructive. He issued a statement, in fact gave a long interview, and I found this very interesting. I quote for you: "I believe that the great richness of China today lies in looking to the future from a present that is sustained by the memory of its cultural past." You see, this is very important. If you're trying to really understand what is Chinese cultural past and how it is manifested in modern times, that is something which one needs to really recognize and understand. So having given this, there are two things that I want to point out, and particularly those have not been really discussed. One is that China has come up with a new model of development. There is a paradigm shift in development by linking it with security. And when they began to link it with security, they have also carried it forward in terms of culture and cultural exchanges. And now you can see it manifested in the form of Asia policy that has recently been released. So there is this whole spectrum that one needs to really look and have a understanding on that basis. So it is in this context that I want to suggest and argue that the OBOR, which has been talked about and a lot of interest has been generated, but what has not been talked about is that it is an ambitious project. It is a very well thought out project. It's a project which involves 4.5 billion people and 60 countries. And of course, there is huge investment that everybody has sort of really pointed out. So what is it, and what is it that it aims at? In my understanding and interpretation, I fall back on two theoreticians of earlier times. One, Mackinder, the other, Spikeman. If you are interested, you know, this is an area which falls in what Spikeman called rimland states. These rimland states are resource-rich, conflict-ridden, and intractable conflicts. So what is it that the Chinese are coming up with in terms of really making a case for it? Yes, you can make a case for geoeconomics, but the reality is this is China's counter-containment strategy. It's a counter-containment strategy which is very well thought out, and it is in this context that you may want to really see how it will really bring about the kind of changes and the kind of interests that Chinese are really articulating. So they're not articulating simply economic, regional connections, cultural support, strategic interest, and in-depth, a longer perspective, thereby, as I say, coming up with a new paradigm in both developmental perspective, security perspective, governance, and international order. And that is something which is very meaningful and substantive, and that is what one needs to really recognize. So the question which I want to raise with you is, who is resisting OBOR? Of course, the earlier speaker pointed out, India is one of them. India and, of course, United States of America are more than sort of keen that, yes, if we can possibly, sabotage, stop, maybe. India is very careful and cautious. India is a state which will not easily be persuaded by US or simply pulled over by the US interest. So they have a paradox. They have a good and a very strong economic relationship with China. And on the other side, they have to worry about, can they really? So the paradox is tough. But it has other problems also. The other problems are, for example, Burma, which is Myanmar, Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, in Burma, there was resistance to the OBOR, and again, some changes and readjustments have been made, and there is a possibility that now, once again, they will begin to move. But don't forget Myanmar, because of this new regime change, there is a possibility that it may not be that easy. So resistance is there. The second point which the OBR has not really taken into consideration, because they're focusing on state to state. The civil society reactions are also emerging in parts of these, many of these countries, including Pakistan, not necessarily Iran, and I'll come back to that in 1 minute, but in Sri Lanka, in, of course, Burma, you saw these kind of protests and resentment. And of course, on the South Pacific area, U.S. is very keen to recreate alliances, think in terms of, making alliances and create a situation whereby, as I said, posturing becomes very, very important. The third element, which is equally important with reference to OBOR and is a matter of concerns, is the kind of deals that are being made between the states. And when the deals are being made, the issue is transparency and accountability. So the Chinese are really going to get, more involved as they began to think in terms of how do you share, how do you work together, how do you look into these things. So it is in that context, again, that the Americans will come to the rescue of Chinese, because they know how laws and procedures operate in different parts of the countries, what are the rules of the business, and how one may want to really work around them. So in that context too, whether it is Iran, whether it is Pakistan, whether it is India, the Chinese-American collaboration and deeper understanding is something which is very, very important in terms of moving forward. So in that way, you will see both a situation which is paradoxical, that on one side there is this conflict part, on the other side there are pushing and strong interests in terms of really banding together and arguing and moving things forward in that sense. So you have OBOR, despite, as I make a case, that despite as a very strong, well thought out plan, meticulous kind of counter-containment strategy, you have certain resistance that is coming on this. Now, coming to the Arab world, and I will be very quick, I want to make a case that there are a couple of catalyst events which have not been really discussed or even raised here, and I do want to raise them so that you have some sense of where am I coming from. There are two events that I would like to point out in the historical context. One is the 67 Arab-Israeli War, and in 1968, the withdrawal of British from the east of Suez. When you began to look at these two, you realize what has been the consequence, what has been the impact of these on the area which we are dealing with today. One is that as a consequence of 67 war, the kind of humiliation the Arabs went through has had a deep psychological impact on them, and you have a situation what one needs to worry. So what happened? Number one was that Israel's primacy as a military power was established, and it continues to persist. Palestinian issue became a core issue. Nevertheless, it got diluted for several different reasons, which is way beyond, later part, and I don't want to get there. The third is Saudi Arabia was replaced by Egypt as a power, and of course you have the British protectorate, which was withdrawn from these states. So Iran began to assert and lay territorial claims. Now, this is a fear which continues to sort of perpetuate among the Gulf states, and this was further intensified by two more catalyst events. One is the 1978 Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, and the Khomeini revolution. And when you began to look at the Khomeini revolution part, you have a serious concern in terms of being anti-monarchy. So there again, you have the whole Iraq-Iran war and the consequences that you began to see. But the point that I'm trying to suggest is that as a result of this, you began to see sectarian issue, which was a non-issue. And today, it has become so potent and powerful that the OIC sort of excludes Iran, is not willing to listen to what Iran wants to say. So that way, it's a problematic area and an issue that one needs to see this. So here, the Arab Ajami issue becomes a kind of issue that one has to really sort of deal and work through. So the challenge for the Chinese is that, yes, their presence is on the rise, but the question is, this presence, will it in any way enhance their diplomatic skills, and would it really help them in doing the mediation part? The low mediation, it may not necessarily work, and hence you have to really recognize and understand that. Now, in this context, and I'll make only one statement very quickly, in this context, Gulf, Iran, and Pakistan are critical. Gulf, everyone has almost stated very clearly in terms of oil supply and the richness. But at the same time, if you follow the theoretical perspective on Spikeman and Mackinder, you are likely to see who controls the Arabian Sea. Whosoever controls the Arabian Sea is likely to dominate the Indian Ocean. And if you dominate the Indian Ocean, you are likely to move towards the Indo-Pacific. For the first time, US is challenged in the Pacific. This was not the case, and this is something which is making US nervous, agitated, and concerned in terms of how should they really respond to the kind of changes that are coming. So that's one part of it. It is in this context that Iran and Pakistan will be of critical importance. The two are different, but they are both countries which have had good and complicated relations with United States of America. For Pakistan, US-Pakistan relationship is a painfully enduring relationship. For China, Iran, besides the civilizational part, it is a very important strategic relationship. It is in this context that you may want to really have some understanding and appreciation that China and Iran will move quickly. Pakistan will have its own difficulties and stumbling blocks, which I can talk. But in my understanding and in the argument that I make, the case of Pakistan is very much like the Israel for US. It is in a similar way. Now, increasingly, it will become the Israel of China, and one has to really recognize and understand that. So the question is, will there be greater understanding and promotion of collaboration between China, Pakistan, Iran, or will Saudi Arabia be a stumbling block and the divide on the sectarian lines really going to really sap the energies of the Arab world? I think that is where the Arab world has to worry about and get out of the kind of situation. Otherwise, they will miss the opportunity that OBOR is providing, because the challenges it also has many, and that is what one needs to recognize and understand. Thank you so much, sir.
عن تداعيات تحول الاستراتيجية العالمية للولايات المتحدة على العلاقات الصينية الخارجية، دكتور جورج جياوزيو داون يتحدث عن هذا الموضوع.
First, I want to thank the Arab Center for inviting me, and also thank them for sitting me in this panel. My co-panelists are well-established scholars, so their books and talks are the sources I can learn from. I felt extremely humble and honored to be sitting in this panel. So today, my topic is about U.S. strategy in the Gulf region and also China's perspective on it. It's a little bit a broad topic, and it's contentious. So I think here we got a lot of diplomats and veteran experts. They might know better than me on this topic. So I will just give my preliminary thoughts on this topic and hopefully lead to further discussion. So I will categorize my talk into three parts. First is the U.S. long-term Gulf strategy and China's perspective. The second one is the changing or the potential strategic shift of the U.S. policy in the Gulf and China's perspective on it. The third part is China's reaction to this kind of a strategic change in the Gulf region. So for the first part, we're not talking about China's role in the Gulf. It is inevitable to discuss U.S. strategy in the region. The United States is not only the integral part of the current strategic situation in the Gulf, but also the key force in shaping the pattern of the region. So I think during the Cold War, the strategy pursued by the United States in Persian Gulf was shaped fundamentally by the U.S.-Soviet strategic and ideological competition, which led to the U.S. Close alignment with the local Gulf monarchies and following the objective of containing Soviet influence in the region and preserving continued access to Persian Gulf oil. The U.S. was responsible for the security and stability of local allies, especially the two pillars, it's Iran and Iraq and Saudi Arabia. But after the Iranian Revolution in 1979 and the Kuwait War in 1991, Iran and Iraq became a state of concern in the eyes of the United States and its closest ally, Israel. because due to the contiguous challenge to the U.S. constructed order in the region. So from that time, the containing regional anti-American factors, including the state factors and non-state factors, becomes a key strategy of the U.S. in the region. And it was very welcomed by the local GCC countries because they feel the threat directly from their big neighbors. And the security security interest of the U.S. in the Gulf reached its peak after the September 11 attacks in homeland New York City. Although the U.S.-Saudi relationship cooled down slightly because of some attackers' Saudi identity, but the George Bush administration still relies on the Gulf ally in counter-terrorism campaign in the Middle East region, both financially and morally. And in return, the GCC country had American solid strategic commitment to their security and stability in spite of turbulent situation in the region. So this is basically the U.S. Long-term strategy existed for a long time in the region. It hasn't changed until recently. So how does China look at it? I think China have two major concerns about this kind of strategy. The first concern is that China thinks the U.S. strive to form the unipower structure in the region by itself. So if we're having United States have a monolistic unipolar structure in the region, China will lose its diplomatic resilience in the Middle East. But on the contrary, if there is a bipolar or multipolar structure, which can provide Chinese diplomacy with essential space and flexibility to win the Arab countries' support. Additionally, one single powers control on the major exporting and producing oil countries is a big threat to China's energy security. As for economic and trade interests, the existence of a unipower hegemony may undermine China's economic cooperation and the investment opportunities with the region country. So another China's concern towards the American policy in the Middle East, especially the Gulf, is American pursue democracy promotion occasionally by the means of a regime change, which in China's view contribute to the ongoing turmoil in the region. So China originated from its own experience in the last 3 decades. China believes that only peaceful and stable environment can create the prosperity, social prosperity, and economic development. So in the latest China Our Policy white paper released just before China's President Xi visit to Middle East in January 2016, China summarized its policy towards the Arab states as 4 supports. China supports Arab states in following their chosen paths, in resolving the regional contentious issues through political means, in achieving a win-win and common development with China, in playing a bigger role in the regional and international affairs in more effective safeguarding their legitimate rights and interests. So contrary to United States ideological-oriented policy, China prioritized the political stability and the economic development over democratic transition in the region. So coming to the second part. My second part is that there's a lot of saying about the U.S. is leaving the region. It has been in the air for a while. I think the turning point for the change of U.S.-GCC relation is 2008, which the U.S. witnessed a shale gas revolution and a global financial crisis at the same time. And in 2008, the shale gas accounted for more than half of the U.S. gas output. It means a decrease in U.S. dependency on Gulf energy. In the last 5 years, the U.S. oil production has increased almost in 60%, and the natural gas production has increased over 20%, which makes, of course, the United States is the largest natural gas producer in the world and also looks to be the largest producer through the end of any forecasted future in 20 years. It has already surpassed Saudi Arabia as the largest producer of oil, and the massive energy production makes the United States the net exporter of energy for the first time in 16 years. And at the same time, I think after being close ally with the Gulf countries for more than 4 decades, the United States seemed reluctant to continue because of the domestic public become fatigued about the long-term Middle Eastern engagement, and is less dependent on energy right now. So So if we look at the statistics, in 2015, just as the ISIL attack in California, the CNN poll shows that 58% of the Americans believe that, here I quote, the United States should not take the leading role in trying to solve international problems, compared with 39% saying it should. And there is more signals of a United States strategic shift, like announcement of the pivot to Asia strategy, and Obama's recent profile in Atlantic magazine about the willingness of disengagement in the Middle East. So how does China view the proposed change in the US Gulf relation? If we look at the difference of the strategic judgment of China and the US on its interest, China, there is a leading scholar on energy security, Professor Li Bing. He encapsulated it precisely in his article, here I quote, unless the price is unaffordable, the US usually isn't reluctant to sacrifice economic interest for security interest. However, China evaluates economic interest at the same level as the security interest, and sometimes economic interest wins more attention. So to make my talk short, I think based on this perception, China doesn't expect the US to leave this region in the near future. And there are also several reasons for China doesn't want the United States to leave the region. The first is because that amidst the accelerated tension in South China Sea, China views the Gulf region as an alternative platform which can have a common interest more than divergence with the United States. And the second one, China fully realized it is incapable to become a substitute for the US power in the Gulf region. So for Saudi Arabia, it has relied on US military power for more than 4 decades. But China cannot provide such kind of security protection to Saudi Arabia as the United States give to the kingdom. And the third one is that the West, especially the US, still have the most sophisticated knowledge and leverage in the region. So China needs to acclimatize itself to the complicated regional situation by learning and cooperating with the West, especially the veteran shareholders like the United States. So what is China's reaction to the US global strategy shift? So Chinese policymakers realize fully that the US power will remain existing in the region for a while. And China also gradually been constructing its unique vision for the Middle Eastern region and the Gulf in particular. I think the initiative One Belt, One Road promulgated by Chinese president conspicuously represent China's ambition to promote prosperity and pan-Euro-Asia continent as opposed to the US ambition of Trans-Pacific and Transatlantic economic zone, which is excluding China. So I think China's policymakers realize that China has its own advantage and its own weakness when engaging with the GCC countries. So in terms of political maneuver, China is still inexperienced with little knowledge about the region. But China noticed the urgent and the intention of GCC country to achieve economic development and industrial upgrade. So I think China is going to building up its competitiveness in the region by participating in the GCC countries' post-petroleum transformation and bonding their future prosperity with China's institutions. So, for example, I think given that China and GCC countries are highly complementary in their economics, so China's traditional market, like the US and the EU, declining commodity demand, China considered the GCC country as an alternative solution to its foreign trade shrink. Also, there are two incentives for China to build up a further economic relationship with the GCC. On one part, the state-owned enterprises and government-related enterprises played a big role in both in China and in GCC countries. So I think the intensive cooperation between them can boost the legitimacy of state capitalism. On another part, both China and GCC countries are listed as the owner of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds. So compared to their enormous investment in the Western market and government bonds, both sides' mutual investment are too small to be mentioned. So I think it is fairly reasonable for China and GCC countries to promote each other as a political and economic shareholder by reciprocal investment in the future. And second, I think China expects the GCC country to integrate their banking system and financial system into emerging renminbi, which is a China currency zone, by handling payment and capital market and financial asset by using renminbi as the basic international currency. And third one, I think promoting institutional reform in global governance is among the goals of China's foreign diplomacy. China considers the GCC country as a potential ally in building up the emerging countries' voice in the global stage. But the reality is that the emerging countries' economic development cannot either be sustainable or transform their disadvantaged position in the world unless they narrow down the industrial and technological gap with the developed country. As so, China and the GCC countries share the same similar interest in the issue of a carbon emission trading to acquire enough emission quota for the industrialization of the developing countries. And also with respect to technology, China seeks to promote in-depth cooperation with the GCC country in renewable energy and including solar power, wind power, and nuclear power. So by this kind of technology innovation, I think it is possible that for China and the GCC country to amend their over-independence on carbon-hydrate energy and take the lead in the future industrial revolution. I think it's always good to end by some good aspirations. Thank you very much.
نفتح المجال الآن للأخوة الحضور من أجل توجيه أسئلتهم إلى المشاركين هنا.
Yes, I have a question for Tugurul. It seems to me that over the last few years, the situation in Xinjiang is getting worse and worse. I mean, China has these strike hard policies which tend to just exacerbate the situation. Do you see Turkey playing any role in trying to offer perhaps alternative approaches to controlling the situation in Xinjiang among the Uyghurs?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. خالد الأصفر كاتب وباحث. سؤالي للمتحدث الصيني. قبل ربع قرن صدر كتاب شهير لا أذكر مؤلفه كان عنوانه اليابان يمكن أن تقول لا. ورغم مرور ربع قرن ولا يبدو أن اليابان قالت لا ولا يبدو ذلك في الأفق في المدى المنظور يعني.
سؤالك لمن عفوا؟ سؤالك لمن؟
للمتحدث الصيني. نعم.
جورج.
فهل يبدو في الأفق أن الصين يمكن أن تقول لا ولا هنا المقصود بها لا للهيمنة الأمريكية والغربية وانعكاساتها على العالم العربي؟ شكرا.
My question to Mr. Said Shafqat, Ashraf Siddiqui, a political analyst. How you see Chinese interest and investments in the region as a threat to American interests? And also looking into the recent visit of President Obama to African countries.
Just 3 questions, because we don't have a time. 2 more questions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Who was that question addressed to? I mean, I couldn't present my paper. My paper is almost 12,000 words, and I prepare almost 46 slides. But I don't think Turkey can provide an alternative solution to this this complicated issue because of the third actor get involved in this, which is the United States. After the death of the İsa Yusuf former secretary of the Eastern Turkestan Republic, basically, between 1949 till 1997, 98, basically, Turkey used to be center of the Uyghur nationalism because of the leadership was in Turkey. But after 1997, after the Gulja movement, basically, Gulja incidents took place in 1997 in Yining, basically, in Chinese, which is, the mixed region with, Uyghurs and Kazakhs. I think Uyghur nationalism was hijacked by the United States. Therefore, Turkey, I don't think Turkey can offer any solution, but can help the China with the cooperation with the China. But meantime, Turkey is a member of the NATO. It's very difficult to cooperate with China. Turkey is in a very difficult position in this context, similar to Erdogan's position. What happened the last year, I was trying to explain basically just before the Erdogan's visit. This was fueled by the, this media fabricated news, basically fueled by the, NED sponsor organizations in Turkey, which is the Eastern Turkestan associations in Turkey, their website and media. And this was a provocation by the United States, basically, in order to have, in order to damage the relationship between Turkey and China. But in this context, Uyghur movement is divided into three sections here. One is supported by the United States, financed by the United States, which is the World Uyghur Congress, Uyghur American Associations, Uyghur Human Rights Project, heavily funded by the NED, almost $1 million a year. On the other hand, you see the, the radical Islamism, basically radical Islamism. I don't want to use this term, but Salafi movement that Uyghurs get involved. And third part is the exile government in Turkey, which is the, these are more independent than the other actors. And in this context, Turkey is between China and the United States as a member of the NATO. How Turkey can, provide the alternative solution in this context? Maybe, the improving the economic, social, political relation with the China. So, from my perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Takran. Dr. George?
Okay, thank you for your question. If I understand it rightly, you're asking, does China aspire to become the dominant player in the region as the American does, or the Western does? Is that right? Okay, so, no, it's not right, sorry. Okay, so I think in China's view, the dominance of the Western dominance in the region is basically very problematic. So I think it has two reasons. The one reason is that any foreign imposed dominance in the region will be resisted by the local, maybe in the beginning it was not resisted, but in long term it will eventually be resisted because it's a foreign externally imposed. And then another reason is that I think due to what happened in 2003, especially the American invasion of Iraq, so I think the world knows that you can never know enough about the region. Even if you have thousands of experts or diplomats operating in the region, but you can never say you know enough about the region. I think from that kind of experience, China will be humble enough to learn a lot from this kind of tragedy. Or so I don't think China will become a dominant power like the U.S. or the West did before. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. There is no threat to American interest with reference to Chinese interest. You remember Pakistan was the facilitator between China and US way back in 1970s when it was a question of bridging the two or bringing the two together. However, there is a serious difference between Pakistani perspective in dealing with India, because Pakistan perceives that US is cultivating India as a bulwark against China. So there is a fundamental difference in terms of perception. Number two is, the idea that Pakistan feels that it is India's hegemony that US is trying to establish, particularly with reference to Afghanistan and relations in the region. So that way, the differences are there.
Thank you. شكرا للحضور، شكرا للمشاركين.